Have you ever wondered if your taste in music says something more about you? Like, beyond just whether you think a song is catchy or not.
Mm, that's an interesting question.
What if your playlist could, like, offer clues to your personality?
Hmm.
That's what we're going to be looking at today. We're doing a deep dive into a study all about music preference and personality in young adults.
Huh?
It's called Study of Music Preference and Personality in Young Adults.
Hmm.
It was done by Sudarshan Kruk, and it was published in 2024.
Okay.
They looked at 100 people, mostly from two places in India, Kerala and Punjab. And they were all between the ages of 18 and 26.
Gotcha.
And what they were trying to do is see how preferences for different types of music, there are 4 different categories that they used, related to something called the Big 5 personality traits.
Okay.
Have you heard of the Big 5 personality traits?
I have, yeah.
Okay, so just as a real quick refresher for our listeners, the Big 5 are openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And so the 4 musical categories that they used in this study were reflective and complex, intense and rebellious, upbeat and conventional, and energetic and rhythmic.
Okay.
And to get those categories, they use something called the short test of music preferences, or STOMP.
Okay.
And to assess the Big 5 personality traits, they used the Big 5 inventory, or the BFI.
Gotcha.
So this isn't just like, people casually noticing a pattern or whatever. This is like an actual study.
Right.
They use correlation analysis and t-tests to look for actual statistically meaningful relationships between these things.
Yeah, it sounds pretty thorough.
So you might think your music taste is like random. You just like what you like.
Yeah.
But this study actually suggests that there might be something deeper going on.
Interesting.
So let's look at some of the connections that they found. So for people who really liked reflective and complex music, think of music that has a lot of layers. Maybe it's emotionally engaging, kind of intricate. They found a pretty strong correlation between liking that kind of music and also scoring high on the openness scale. Yeah, the correlation coefficient was at 0.371, which is considered to be a moderate positive correlation. And the p-value was less than 0.01. So that's a strong statistical finding.
Wow.
And what that basically means is that if you are drawn to music that is complex and, maybe a little bit challenging, you're also more likely to be someone who's open to new experiences and ideas.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if you think about it, if you're someone who embraces novelty and enjoys exploring new things, you're probably going to be attracted to music that has that same kind of complexity and depth.
Right.
It's like looking for those hidden layers and the unexpected twists and turns, both in music and in life.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is that it didn't just stop with openness. They actually also found positive correlations between preferring that kind of music and scoring higher on conscientiousness and agreeableness.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. For conscientiousness, it was 0.269. And for agreeableness, it was 0.210.
So those are like smaller correlations.
Yeah, smaller, but still statistically significant.
Yeah. So if we put all those pieces together, then someone who loves, the intricacies of reflective and complex music might not only be really open-minded, but they might also be more organized and considerate of other people.
Right, exactly.
So it's fascinating how those traits seem to cluster together.
Okay, so what about intense and rebellious music? That was the next category. So think about, heavy metal, punk rock, stuff like that.
Yeah.
That one had a pretty strong positive correlation with extraversion, which kind of makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah.
Because that kind of music is very energetic. It's often about, rebellion and expressing yourself really strongly. And people who are extroverted tend to be more outgoing and, they like to assert themselves. So it kind of fits.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess if you're drawn to that kind of raw energy and that sense of rebellion, it could be a way of expressing those aspects of your own personality, or maybe even connecting with others who share those same values.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, this next one might surprise you.
Okay.
Upbeat and conventional music. So think like your poppy, happy songs.
Right.
That was also positively correlated with openness and conscientiousness.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know, I guess you might expect people who like that kind of music to be maybe a little bit less open to new things.
Yeah, that's what you might think.
But it sounds like that's not necessarily the case.
Right. For openness, the correlation was 0.431, and for conscientiousness, it was 0.271.
So liking those familiar happy tunes could actually be a sign of being, pretty open-minded and responsible.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so the last category was energetic and rhythmic music.
Okay.
And this is the stuff that makes you want to move. So the things like EDM, high energy Latin rhythms, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they found positive correlations with openness and conscientiousness, which, follows the pattern that we've been seeing.
Right.
But here's what gets interesting. There was actually a negative correlation with neuroticism.
So what does that mean exactly?
So negative correlation, it means that as one thing goes up, the other thing tends to go down.
Okay.
So in this case, people who really liked energetic and rhythmic music, they tended to score lower on neuroticism, which means they're probably less prone to negative emotions.
Interesting. So it's like the more you love music that makes you want to move, the less likely you are to experience things like, anxiety or sadness.
Yeah, that's basically what the study suggests. All right, so the study also looked at whether there were any differences in music preferences between men and women. And they used something called an independent sample t-test to do that.
Uh-huh.
And actually, they didn't find any significant differences between the genders for any of the 4 music types.
Oh, it's not like men were more likely to like intense and rebellious music or anything like that.
Nope, no significant differences.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it kind of challenges some of the stereotypes that we have about, what kind of music men and women are supposed to like.
Yeah, because, we often hear these kind of generalizations, like guys are all about, hard rock and girls are all about pop music.
Right, exactly. But according to this study, at least for this group of young adults, it seems like personality plays a bigger role than gender when it comes to music taste.
So what you're saying is your love for death metal might have more to do with your personality traits than with, whether you're a man or a woman.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
However, they did find some interesting differences in the average personality scores between men and women.
Oh, really? Like what?
So, for example, men in the study scored slightly higher on conscientiousness than women. The average score for men was 32.69, and for women it was 30.64.
Okay, so that's just a small difference.
Yeah, it's small, but it was statistically significant. And then women scored slightly higher on neuroticism. The average score for women was 24.73, and for men it was 22.49.
So again, a pretty subtle difference.
Yeah, exactly. Now, of course, it's important to remember that this study has some limitations.
Right, every study does.
Yeah, and the authors of the study actually acknowledged this. So, first of all, the participants were primarily from 2 specific regions in India.
Kerala and Punjab, right?
Yeah. So that means we can't necessarily assume that these findings would apply to people from other cultures or even other parts of India.
Right, because musical tastes can vary so much from culture to culture.
Exactly.
And even, personality traits can be expressed and perceived differently in different cultural contexts.
Right. Another limitation is that they used self-reported data.
Yeah, so people were just describing their own music preferences and personality traits.
Yeah, exactly. And, we all know that sometimes what we say about ourselves isn't totally accurate.
Yeah, sometimes we're not even fully aware of our own biases.
Right. Or sometimes we want to present ourselves in a certain way.
Exactly.
And then another thing is that this was what's called a cross-sectional study, which means it just gives us a snapshot in time. So it can show us correlations, but it can't tell us anything about cause and effect.
Right, so we don't know for sure if, like, having a certain personality trait makes you more likely to enjoy a certain type of music, or if, like, listening to a certain type of music over a long period of time could actually shape your personality in some way.
Right, exactly. So those are all important things to keep in mind.
Definitely.
So what's the key takeaway for our listeners? Well, I think this deep dive shows us that your musical tastes aren't just random.
Right.
They might actually be a reflection of deeper parts of your personality.
Yeah, and I think what's really valuable here is the idea that our musical choices might not be, just about the sounds that we enjoy.
Yeah.
It could be a way that we express ourselves, connect with certain emotions, and maybe even seek out experiences that resonate with who we are at our core.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So think about your own playlist.
Yeah.
Do any of these correlations resonate with you? Could the music that you're drawn to be like an outward sign of your inner world? Or maybe even a way that you seek out moods and experiences that match your personality?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating question. And, it makes me wonder, like, could understanding these connections help us understand ourselves better? Or even, help us understand other people better.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought.
Or maybe even encourage us to, branch out and explore new musical genres that we might not have considered before.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, you can actually find the full study of music preference and personality in young adults in the Educational Administration Theory and Practice Journal. It has a lot more detail about their methods and all the things that they found. And who knows, maybe it'll change the way you think about your favorite music.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely encourages you to listen with a more curious ear, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
To kind of think about those, psychological harmonies, if you will, behind the music that really moves us.
I like that. Psychological harmonies.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
All right.
But keep those psychological harmonies playing, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.